Washington feared Israel was planning to kill Iran's negotiators during the peace talks. Washington quietly warned Tehran. On one flight home, Iranian officials said Israeli jets had entered Iranian airspace. The plane made an emergency landing. The delegation drove the rest of the way. This week, 15 million Iranians are expected to mourn the supreme leader Israel killed. And Tehran has a message. The call for vengeance must ring in the ears of the whole world. According to a report by the New York Times, US officials believed Israel may have planned to use US-Iran peace negotiations as an opportunity to assassinate Iran's top negotiators. The report says Washington was particularly concerned that Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi and Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf could be targeted while indirect ceasefire negotiations were underway. According to the report, US officials feared any Israeli strike against either man would immediately derail diplomacy and reignite the war. The report also suggested Washington was so concerned that it asked several Middle Eastern governments to quietly warn Tehran about the potential threat facing its negotiating team. The report adds that targeting senior Iranian officials had been part of Israel's broader wartime strategy. During the early stages of the conflict, Israel reportedly killed senior Iranian figures involved in contacts with Washington, including former Foreign Minister Kamal Karazi and senior national security official Ali Larijani. Earlier reporting by the Wall Street Journal had claimed both Araghchi and Ghalibaf were initially placed on an Israeli target list before being removed once negotiations with the United States began. The fresh report from the New York Times reveals that the Trump administration played an active role in persuading Israel not to target at least Ghalibaf. The report also claims Ghalibaf remained at risk even after talks began. During a visit to Islamabad in April for meetings that reportedly included US Vice President J.D. Vance, Pakistani fighter jets escorted the Iranian delegation through Pakistani airspace. On the return journey, Iranian security officials allegedly warned that Israeli fighter aircraft had entered Iranian airspace from the Iraqi border and could be preparing to attack Ghalibaf's aircraft. According to the report, the plane made an emergency landing near the border, and the delegation completed the journey to Tehran by road. Meanwhile, Iran's foreign minister, while referring to the recently signed Islamabad Memorandum of Understanding, said the agreement leaves no ambiguity about US commitments, while warning that any threat against Iran's leadership or its people would trigger an immediate and forceful response.
The terms of the Islamabad MOU are crystal clear and public for all to see. POTUS has committed the US to muzzling its pets in Tel Aviv. If they ignore their master, Iran will school them. Any threat against our people and leadership will receive immediate powerful response.
Into this already volatile environment, Iran is now preparing for the state funeral of Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, killed in Israeli airstrikes on February 28th, the opening day of the war. Funeral processions begin Saturday in Tehran and conclude July 9th in Mashhad. Officials expect 15 to 20 million mourners, which would make it the largest state funeral in Iranian history. Ghalibaf called on Iranians to attend en masse.
I invite all the Iranian people to write a glorious page in the history of Islamic Iran through your presence. The nation's call for vengeance must ring in the ears of the whole world.
An Iranian military commander issued a direct warning to Washington and Jerusalem ahead of the ceremonies.
We warn the enemies of Iran, especially the US and the Zionist regime, to avoid any miscalculation and to think about the harsh retaliation our armed forces would make to any threat and aggression against our country.
Iranian Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf has urged millions to attend the funeral, declaring that the nation's call for vengeance must ring in the ears of the whole world. At the same time, Tehran has escalated tensions in the Gulf, warning that ships transiting the Strait of Hormuz must follow Iranian-designated routes or face what it described as an immediate and forceful response. the developments underscore the fragile state of US-Iran diplomacy, with American officials reportedly fearing that a single targeted strike against Iran's negotiators could have collapsed the peace process and triggered another regional escalation. The alliance that has shaped the Middle East for decades is showing signs of strain. Behind closed doors, Washington and Riyadh are reportedly clashing over the war with Iran, military cooperation, and the future of American forces in the Gulf. What was once considered one of the region's strongest strategic partnerships is now facing one of its most difficult periods in recent years. According to reports from regional officials and the Wall Street Journal, relations between the United States and Saudi Arabia have significantly deteriorated following Washington's decision to launch a war against Iran. A Middle Eastern intelligence official told the Times of Israel that ties between the two countries have substantially soured because of the conflict, confirming growing concerns that the war has triggered serious political fallout across the Gulf. One of the biggest points of tension centered on a US military operation known as Project Freedom, which aimed to break Iran's control over the Strait of Hormuz by escorting stranded ships through the strategic waterway. According to the Journal, Saudi Arabia refused to allow the United States to use its military bases and airspace for the operation. Despite those facilities being considered essential to the mission, the refusal reportedly forced Washington to abort the operation. At the time, US President Donald Trump publicly claimed that progress in negotiations with Iran had prompted him to halt Project Freedom after less than 2 days. However, officials familiar with the matter say Saudi Arabia's refusal played a decisive role. The report says the White House reacted angrily, threatening to suspend deliveries of interceptor systems that Saudi Arabia had been using to defend itself against Iranian missiles and drones. Although Riyadh later relented, and Project Freedom reportedly resumed covertly, American officials acknowledged that the damage to bilateral relations had already been done. The Wall Street Journal also reports that Washington is now considering reducing its military presence in Saudi Arabia. Diplomatic tensions have continued to deepen. Secretary of State Marco Rubio recently toured the Gulf, visiting the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, and Bahrain, while skipping Saudi Arabia, a decision reportedly viewed in Riyadh as a diplomatic snub. A week earlier, Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman also declined an invitation to attend the G7 summit in France alongside President Trump, reportedly in protest over Washington's handling of the war. Saudi Arabia had repeatedly urged the United States not to launch military action against Iran, fearing Tehran would retaliate by disrupting the Strait of Hormuz, destabilizing the region and threatening global energy supplies. Although Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states eventually allowed US forces to use their bases after initially resisting, Iran's retaliatory strikes targeted regional energy infrastructure, prompting Riyadh to push for a diplomatic solution to end the conflict. Saudi officials also pressed Washington to persuade the United Arab Emirates to halt its continued attacks on Iran, arguing that further escalation would place Gulf energy facilities at even greater risk. Despite a memorandum of understanding that introduced a 60-day ceasefire, reopened the Strait of Hormuz, and established a framework for negotiations over Iran's nuclear program, serious divisions remain, with Israel distancing itself from the agreement and Saudi confidence in Washington reportedly shaken. One of the Middle East's most important strategic partnerships now appears to be entering an increasingly uncertain phase.